It's been a tough 2 years for schooling in South Africa. The academic years were interrupted a number of times. While some pupils could do online learning, many others simply had no access. The Basic Department of Education holding a Lekgotla to discuss schooling under a pandemic. About 200 delegates are participating. Our reporter and my fellow eNCA, Masego Rahlaga, is there, joining us now this hour to give us the latest there. Masego, good afternoon to you. First, can you tell us what the Minister has had to say about the challenges this sector is facing, basic education is facing, for example, because of the damage to property that we are seeing, including schools?
Definitely, Bradan. We know that we are a country, that has many of those communities when disgruntled, for instance, would target schools in terms of making sure that government ministers that they've been calling for come down to their communities to see their plight. A clear example, Bradan, you'd remember, is Vuani in Limpopo. For years they had been burning schools, and every time it would be an election year, it was a hot spot. So the minister talking exactly about that, saying that in her day, damage to state property such as schools came with a hefty jail term, and this is what she's hoping her counterpart in the police ministry, General Begicele, will be able to talk to her about in terms of bringing back that rule or making an example with people who, for instance, have been arrested for damage to property, not to just be released after damaging infrastructure such as schools, because in her admission as minister, it's already a department that has problems when it comes to that. There are already, for instance, schools that don't have adequate infrastructure for learning. And so if communities burn those schools that are available, it poses as a huge threat to the education sector. But here is a snippet of what the minister had to say, particularly about that concern of damage to property.
There must be a way that there's legislation around metal scraps, because it encourages people to go and strip schools of any sellable material. When I grew up, as you said, program director that I grew up in Pimville, our house was at a corner house, and we knew that if a thug is carrying a school's door, we used to call it out 15 years, because that was a minimum sentence, to destroy public property. You couldn't touch public property, because you're not only robbing maybe that family or that individual, we are robbing the whole community. And I think we have to lobby government that there must be, something must give, because this is quite a problem. We have our own problems with infrastructure that we are not coping with. We have our own problems that we have not been able to even improve the infrastructure that we've inherited, because we had to chase building new schools to meet the access commitments that we have made. But then to go back and have to repair, I just think it's unsustainable, it's unacceptable, and committees have to stand up.
Masego, did the minister say anything about the behavior of some teachers or staff in the education sector? I mean, recently we've seen some incidents where they've been found wanting.
Definitely, Bradan. And I mean, for instance, I just want to go back to that point that the minister made earlier. We know that Kenyan President, for instance, Uhuru Kenyatta, actually enforced a new rule in that country that said that selling of metal scraps would be a criminal offense in that country. And a lot of South Africans calling for President Cyril Ramaphosa here in our country to implement the same rule, so that you don't find people having that urge to steal, for instance, state infrastructure, pertaining to, for instance, electricity, when we already have an electricity crisis. A lot of people calling for the president in our country to follow suit to President Uhuru Kenyatta. But to go back to your point, Bradan, you might remember many of the investigations by the Special Investigating Unit, particularly here in Gauteng, having to do with tenders that were awarded in terms of PPE corruption and that scandal there. So it's in terms of that, I think, and on the back of that the minister was talking and saying that, some teachers, because of them being found wanting in a ministry that already gets a huge part of the budget every time each department is allocated money, it is something that also, casts a bad light on the education sector, and that's what always, makes them look bad. Teachers, for instance, Bradan, not only that, teachers, for instance, who are found to be having affairs with pupils that they're supposed to be teaching, things like that, etc., is what the minister was saying is something else that still needs to be spoken about. Not just COVID-19. The education sector has had many problems before COVID-19 became a reality in our lives. But here's the minister again talking about her concerns when it comes to, those officials who are seen to be corrupt.
Our mission as education mandarins must be to serve the people of this great nation with honor and ensure a better life for all. We have to do it faster and well. Our people surely deserve this much. We must therefore intensify our work to restore the capacity of the state to protect the multi-billion rand investment in basic education. Because indeed we enjoy the biggest budget, but sometimes ourselves as people do things that really undermine also our achievements in the sector.